Have you ever had one of those moments where you stop in the middle of your day and quietly ask yourself, why do I still feel like I'm not enough? Not because you've failed, not because you're lazy, not because you've given up, but because, despite everything you've done, the feeling simply refuses to leave. You've worked hard, you've prayed, you've forgiven people who hurt you, you've earned the degree, built the career, taken care of your family, shown up for your friends. You've tried to become a better version of yourself. And yet, at the end of the day, there is still this quiet voice inside that whispers, you should be doing more. You're still behind. You're not where everyone else is. You're still not enough. If you've ever carried that invisible weight, I want you to know something before we go any further. You're not alone, and you're not strange for feeling this way. In fact, many women who appear the strongest on the outside carry this silent emotional burden every single day. Today's conversation isn't about pushing you to work harder. It's not about becoming more successful. It's not about fixing yourself. Because what if the problem isn't that you aren't enough? What if the problem is that you've been measuring your worth with the wrong ruler? Together, I'd like us to gently explore why that feeling stays with you, even when you're doing everything right, and why healing often begins when we stop trying to earn a worth that was never ours to earn. So, wherever you're listening from, whether you're driving home, folding laundry, taking a quiet walk, or simply needing a moment to breathe, I invite you to stay with me. Let's have an honest conversation. Welcome to Core Rich. This is a space where we slow down, reflect honestly, and remember that your worth isn't something you have to prove. It's something you learn to believe. I'm so glad you're here. One of the most confusing things about feeling not enough is that it often happens when your life looks perfectly fine from the outside. People describe you as dependable, strong, responsible, kind. You're the person who remembers birthdays. You show up early. You keep your promises. You rarely let people down. When your family needs someone, they call you. When your friends need advice, they call you. At work, people trust you with responsibility because they know you'll get it done. From the outside, your life may even look admirable. But inside, there's another conversation happening. A conversation no one else hears. It's the conversation that begins the moment you wake up. Did I do enough yesterday? I should probably be further ahead by now. Why does everyone else seem to have figured life out? Maybe I'm wasting time. Maybe I'm falling behind. You carry these thoughts quietly. You continue smiling. You continue achieving. You continue helping. But underneath all of that, there is a constant pressure to become someone better before you finally allow yourself to feel at peace. The difficult part is that this pressure doesn't disappear when you accomplish something. You finish one goal. For a brief moment, there's relief. Then another goal appears. You solve one problem. Another one replaces it. You tell yourself, once I get the promotion, once I lose the weight, once I get married, once the children are older, once I have more savings, once I become more confident, the destination keeps moving, and because it keeps moving, peace keeps moving with it. Without realizing it, you've made peace dependent on reaching a finish line that never stays in the same place. That's exhausting. Not because you're weak, but because you've been running a race with no final destination. Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind dismisses your own accomplishments? Someone congratulates you. You smile. But almost immediately you think, it wasn't that big of a deal. Anyone could have done it. I should have done better. Isn't it interesting how easily we minimize our own growth? Imagine if you spoke to a close friend the way you speak to yourself. Imagine she came to you after months of hard work and proudly shared something she'd achieved. Would your response be, "That's all? You should have done more. Other people have done better"? Of course not. You would probably celebrate her, encourage her, remind her how far she's come. Yet somehow we reserve our harshest words for ourselves. Why? Because somewhere along the way, many of us learned a quiet lesson that our value depends on what we accomplish, not on who we are. And those are two very different things. The truth is, very few people wake up one morning and decide they aren't enough. Most of us learn it slowly, without even realizing we're learning it. And that's where I'd like us to go next.
Because before we can heal this feeling, we first have to understand where it came from. A gentle pause. I think one of the greatest acts of kindness we can offer ourselves is this: to become curious instead of critical. Because when we don't understand why we feel the way we do, our first instinct is often to blame ourselves. Maybe I'm just ungrateful. Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe everyone else handles life better than I do. But healing rarely begins with blame. It begins with understanding. So let's gently ask a different question. Where did this feeling come from? Because the feeling of not being enough doesn't usually appear overnight. It's often something we slowly learn, sometimes without anyone intentionally teaching us. Perhaps as a little girl, you noticed that praise came more easily when you achieved something. Good grades, good behavior, helping around the house, being polite, being responsible. None of those things are wrong. They're beautiful qualities. But if the only time you felt deeply seen was after performing well, your heart may have quietly connected love with performance. Not because someone sat you down and said, "You have to earn love." Most families never say those words, but children don't only learn from words, they learn from patterns. Children are incredibly observant. They notice what gets attention. They notice what gets celebrated. They notice what gets ignored. And over time, they begin writing little stories about themselves. Stories like, if I'm helpful, people stay happy. If I make mistakes, I disappoint people. If I keep everyone pleased, I'll be accepted. If I become perfect, no one can reject me. Again, these stories aren't chosen. They're formed, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. Many women listening today may recognize another pattern, the identity of being the good girl, the one who doesn't cause problems, the one who doesn't ask for too much, the one who says yes, the one who keeps the peace, the one who carries everyone else's emotional weight. People praise her. She's dependable, selfless, reliable, kind. But there's another side that people don't always see. She struggles to say no. She apologizes when she hasn't done anything wrong. She worries about disappointing people. She feels responsible for everyone's happiness. She mistakes self-sacrifice for love. And slowly, without realizing it, she begins disappearing from her own life because she's become so focused on being who everyone else needs that she no longer knows who she needs to be for herself. Perhaps you've experienced that. Perhaps you've looked in the mirror and thought, I've spent so much of my life taking care of everyone else. I don't even know what I want anymore. If that's you, please hear this gently. There is nothing wrong with being caring. There is nothing wrong with being generous. There is nothing wrong with being dependable. The problem begins when your kindness costs you yourself, because kindness should never require self-abandonment. There is one belief that quietly sits underneath so many of these patterns. It often sounds like this: if I can just become better, then I'll finally feel enough. It's such a believable thought, and that's what makes it so powerful. So we keep improving, reading another book, taking another course, working longer hours, trying harder, being nicer, giving more, achieving more, thinking that one more accomplishment will finally quiet that inner voice. Sometimes it does, for a day, maybe even a week. But then the feeling returns. Not because the achievement wasn't meaningful, but because the achievement was trying to solve a problem it was never designed to solve. Achievement can improve your circumstances. It cannot decide your worth. Those are two different conversations. One asks, "What have I done?" The other asks, "Who am I?" And no amount of success can permanently answer the second question. One of the biggest misconceptions in our culture is that confidence naturally comes with success. Sometimes it does, but not always. There are women leading companies who still question themselves, women raising beautiful families who secretly feel like they're failing, women with advanced degrees who believe they aren't intelligent enough, women who look incredibly confident but lie awake replaying conversations from earlier in the day. Success can change your environment. It doesn't automatically change your relationship with yourself. Because if your inner voice has been speaking the language of criticism for years, it doesn't suddenly become compassionate because you've achieved another milestone. Your circumstances may change, but unless the conversation inside your mind changes too, your emotional experience often stays the same. Maybe that's why some of the happiest people you've met weren't necessarily the most successful, and some of the most accomplished people you've met weren't necessarily the most peaceful. Peace isn't always found at the end of achievement. Sometimes it's found at the end of proving. Imagine a woman standing in front of a mirror after accomplishing something she prayed for years to receive. Maybe she finally bought the house, started the business, completed the degree, found the relationship, received the promotion. She smiles. People celebrate her. Photos are taken. Messages arrive. Everyone says, "You deserve it." But later that evening, when the house is quiet, she looks at herself again, and somehow that familiar feeling returns. What's next? Not because she's ungrateful, not because she isn't happy, but because her heart has become so accustomed to chasing worth that it doesn't know how to simply receive it. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. You reach one destination, and before you've even allowed yourself to enjoy it, your mind is already planning the next mountain. Not because you're ambitious, but because stopping feels uncomfortable. Rest feels uncomfortable. Celebrating feels uncomfortable. Receiving feels uncomfortable. You've become so familiar with striving that stillness almost feels unsafe. If any of this resonates with you, I want to say something that I hope you'll carry with you. You are not difficult. You are not broken. You are not failing at life. You're responding to emotional patterns that made sense at one point in your life. The beautiful thing about patterns is that what is learned can also be gently unlearned. And that's where healing begins. Not by becoming someone completely different, but by slowly changing the way you relate to yourself. I'd like to leave you with a small question before we move on. When was the first time you remember feeling that you had to earn approval? Don't rush to answer. Just notice what comes to mind. Sometimes healing begins with a memory we haven't visited in years, and sometimes understanding the beginning of the story changes the ending. There's something I want you to notice. Many of us say we want peace, but if we're honest, we've become much more familiar with pressure than with peace. Pressure feels productive. Pressure feels responsible. Pressure feels safe. If we're not careful, we can begin to mistake constant pressure for purpose. And that can make slowing down feel almost uncomfortable. Have you ever sat down to rest only to feel guilty within a few minutes? You finally have a quiet evening. Nothing urgent needs your attention. But instead of enjoying the moment, your mind starts making a list. I should answer those emails. I should organize the house. I should be reading something useful. I should be planning tomorrow. Notice how often the word should appears. It's a small word, but it carries an enormous amount of emotional weight. Sometimes our lives become a long conversation filled with shoulds. I should be further ahead. I should be happier. I should be more confident. I should have achieved more by now. I should look different. I should be doing more. Eventually, we stop living our lives and start evaluating them. Sometimes, without realizing it, we create an invisible contract with ourselves. It sounds something like this. I'll finally allow myself to feel proud when I lose the weight, when I earn more money, when I get married, when my children succeed, when I buy a home, when people finally recognize my hard work, when I become more confident. The problem is, like every time we reach one of those milestones, we quietly move the finish line. Our minds whisper, yes, but now you should. There is always another condition, another requirement, another reason to postpone contentment. This is what conditional self-worth does. It convinces us that acceptance is always waiting somewhere in the future. But the future keeps moving, so acceptance never arrives. Let's talk about perfectionism. Not the version that people admire, the version that quietly steals your joy. Perfectionism isn't always about wanting everything to be flawless. Sometimes it's about trying to avoid rejection, trying to avoid criticism, trying to avoid disappointing people, trying to avoid feeling like you've failed. On the surface, perfectionism looks impressive. People call you organized, disciplined, reliable, driven. But beneath those qualities, there can be a great deal of fear.
Fear that if you make one mistake, people will see you differently. Fear that if you say no, people will stop liking you. Fear that if you slow down, you'll fall behind. Fear that if you aren't exceptional, you'll become invisible. So you work harder. You over-prepare, you overthink, you replay conversations, you second-guess decisions. You apologize for things that don't require an apology. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system has learned to associate perfection with safety. And when safety feels connected to performance, rest begins to feel dangerous. This is something I wish more people understood. Our nervous system doesn't always respond to facts. It responds to what it has learned. You can know, logically, that you're doing well. You can know that people appreciate you. You can know that you've accomplished meaningful things. And still, your body may carry an old sense of urgency, an old fear, an old belief that whispers, keep proving yourself. That's why healing isn't simply about changing your thoughts. It's also about creating new emotional experiences. Moments where you discover, I can make a mistake and still be loved. I can say no and still be respected. I can rest and nothing terrible happens. Little by little, your nervous system begins to learn a different story, a kinder story. There was a time when comparison mostly happened within our neighborhoods. Today, it's in our pockets. At any moment, we can open an app and witness someone else's highlights, someone else's engagement, someone else's promotion, someone else's holiday, someone else's business, someone else's home, someone else's seemingly perfect life. Without realizing it, our minds begin creating a story. They're ahead. I'm behind. But comparison is deeply unfair because you're comparing your everyday reality with someone else's carefully chosen moments. You're comparing your questions with someone else's announcements, your private struggles with someone else's public victories. No one posts the ordinary Tuesday afternoon when they doubted themselves. No one photographs the quiet moments of uncertainty. No one uploads the hours spent wondering if they're enough. Yet those moments exist in every human life. Comparison hides that truth. When we're constantly measuring ourselves against others, something very subtle begins to happen. We stop noticing our own life, our own progress, our own answered prayers, our own quiet victories, our own growth. Instead of asking, "How far have I come?" we begin asking, "Why am I not where they are?" But someone else's timeline was never meant to become the ruler for your life. Growth has seasons. Some seasons look like visible success. Others look like invisible healing. And healing is progress, even when no one applauds it. There are seasons when your greatest accomplishment isn't launching a business or earning another qualification. Sometimes your greatest accomplishment is learning to speak to yourself with kindness. Sometimes it's setting a boundary for the first time. Sometimes it's choosing peace instead of proving a point. Sometimes it's allowing yourself to rest without guilt. Those victories may not receive applause, but they change the direction of your life. I wonder how many women have overlooked their own growth simply because it didn't look impressive to someone else.
Perhaps you've become more patient, more emotionally aware, more honest, more compassionate, more willing to ask for help, more willing to forgive, more willing to protect your peace. Those changes matter. In fact, they may matter far more than the achievements you've been using to measure your worth. For the next few days, I'd like to invite you to notice something. Every time your mind says, "I'm not enough," don't argue with it. Don't shame yourself for thinking it. Simply pause, take one slow breath, and gently ask, according to whom? According to an old belief? According to someone else's expectations? According to social media? According to fear? Or according to the truth? Sometimes that one question creates enough space for a different answer to emerge. Not immediately, but gently. Because healing rarely arrives all at once. It often arrives one compassionate thought at a time. When we come back to ourselves, I'd like you to remember something that changed the way I understand self-worth forever. There is a difference between living to earn your worth and living from your worth. At first, those two ideas sound almost identical, but they create completely different lives. And once you understand that difference, it's difficult to unsee it. There is a sentence that changed the way I understand self-worth. It isn't complicated. In fact, its simplicity is what makes it so powerful. Here it is. There is a difference between living to earn your worth and living from your worth. At first, those two ideas sound almost identical, but they create completely different lives. Let's imagine two women. On the outside, they may look very similar. Both work hard. Both have goals. Both care deeply about their families. Both want to become better people. But internally, their lives are being shaped by two very different beliefs. The first woman wakes up every morning believing, "Today, I have to prove that I'm enough." So every conversation becomes a test. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every criticism feels personal. Every success feels temporary. Because no achievement ever feels big enough to settle the question she's asking. The question isn't really, "Did I do well today?" The deeper question is, "Am I enough?" And no amount of external success can permanently answer an internal question. Now imagine the second woman. She also works hard. She also grows. She also makes mistakes. But she begins her day with a different belief. My worth is not on trial today. Think about that for a moment. My worth is not on trial today. She still wants to improve. She still apologizes when she hurts someone. She still learns. She still takes responsibility. but she is no longer trying to earn permission to exist peacefully. She isn't performing for love. She isn't chasing approval as proof of her value. She is living from a place of dignity instead of striving toward it. The difference is almost invisible from the outside, but internally, it changes everything. When your worth is no longer something you have to earn, failure becomes information, not identity. You stop saying, "I am a failure." Instead, you begin saying, "That didn't go the way I hoped. What can I learn from it?" Criticism becomes feedback, not a verdict on your value. Success becomes something to celebrate, not something you desperately cling to. Rest becomes part of a healthy life, not a guilty interruption. You begin to understand that growth and self-acceptance can exist together. For so many of us, those two ideas have felt like opposites. We thought that if we accepted ourselves, we'd stop growing. But that's not what happens. When a flower is planted in healthy soil, it doesn't stop growing because the soil accepts it. It grows because it has what it needs. Human beings are not so different. We don't flourish under constant criticism. We flourish where there is safety, where there is compassion, where there is room to learn without fear. There is another belief I'd love for us to release together. The belief that rest is something we have to deserve. Maybe you've said something like this before. "I'll rest once everything is done." But when is everything ever done? There is always another email, another responsibility, another appointment, another expectation, another goal. If rest only comes after you've finished everything, rest will never come. The truth is, rest isn't a prize you win after exhaustion. Rest is one of the ways we remain emotionally healthy. Think about how gently we speak to children when they're tired. We don't tell them, "You've only earned sleep if you've accomplished enough today." We understand that rest is part of being human. Somewhere along the way, many adults forget that truth. We begin treating ourselves like machines instead of people. And then we wonder why we're emotionally exhausted. I wonder how many compliments you've quietly rejected over the years. Someone tells you, "You did a wonderful job." And you immediately respond, "Oh, it was nothing." Someone says, "You look beautiful today." You laugh it off. Someone thanks you sincerely. You become uncomfortable. Receiving can feel surprisingly difficult when you've spent your life believing you have to earn everything. Because receiving requires something many of us haven't practiced: trust. Trust that goodness can simply come to us, without us proving ourselves first. Perhaps today, when someone offers kindness, instead of dismissing it, simply say, "Thank you." Let yourself receive it. Not because you've become perfect, but because kindness doesn't require perfection. Imagine how different your days might feel if you spoke to yourself the way you would speak to someone you deeply love. Instead of, "You're behind," you might say, "You're growing at your own pace." Instead of, "You should have done more," you might say, "You did what you could with the energy you had today." Instead of, "Everyone else has figured it out," you might say, "I'm only seeing a small part of their story." These aren't empty affirmations. They're emotionally honest alternatives. Because compassion isn't pretending everything is perfect. Compassion is telling yourself the truth without cruelty. Perhaps you expected this conversation to end with a list. 5 steps, 7 habits, 10 ways to finally feel enough. But healing rarely works that way. Real healing is quieter. It often begins with awareness, then curiosity, then compassion, then practice. Not perfection, practice. The next time you notice yourself reaching for achievement as proof of your worth, pause. Notice it. Take a slow breath. And remind yourself, I don't have to earn what already belongs to me. Your dignity is not a prize. Your humanity is not conditional. Your worth does not increase on your best days or decrease on your hardest ones. You have always been more than your productivity, more than your appearance, more than your achievements, more than the opinions of other people. And perhaps the life you've been longing for doesn't begin when you finally become enough. Perhaps it begins the moment you stop believing you were ever less. Before we end today's conversation, I'd like to leave you with something to carry into the week ahead. The next time you look in the mirror, before you notice everything you wish were different, pause. Take one slow breath and ask yourself this question. If my worth wasn't something I had to earn today, how would I live differently? Don't rush to answer. Just let the question stay with you. You may discover that the peace you've been searching for isn't waiting at the end of another achievement. It may already be waiting inside a gentler relationship with yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this conversation helped you feel a little less alone, I hope you'll join me again. Here at Core Rich, we believe emotional growth isn't about becoming someone else. It's about coming home to the person you've always been beneath the pressure, beneath the expectations, and beneath the fear. Before we say goodbye, I want you to remember one final truth. You don't have to wake up tomorrow with all the answers. You don't have to silence every insecure thought. You don't have to become a completely different person overnight. Healing rarely happens that way. It happens in ordinary moments. The moment you choose to speak to yourself with a little more kindness. The moment you stop apologizing for taking up space. The moment you allow yourself to rest without guilt. The moment you celebrate your progress instead of dismissing it. The moment you realize that being human has never required you to be perfect. Those small moments may not seem dramatic, but over time, they become a new way of living, a new way of seeing yourself, a new way of moving through the world. So wherever you are today, whether you're feeling hopeful or overwhelmed, whether life feels beautifully full or quietly heavy, I hope you'll remember this. Your worth has never been measured by how much you produce. It has never depended on how flawlessly you perform. It has never been determined by how closely your life resembles someone else's. Your worth has always existed beneath all of that. It has been there on your strongest days. And it has remained there on the days when you struggled just to keep going. Nothing about your humanity needs to be earned. And perhaps that is where peace begins. Not in becoming more, but in believing that you were always worthy of compassion, grace, and love. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself. Be patient with your heart. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you deeply love. And whenever that quiet voice returns to tell you that you're not enough, I hope another voice begins to grow stronger. The voice that gently reminds you, you were never meant to earn the right to believe that you are enough.